welcome to Conversations with Life. We are in season 3 and we're talking about archetype. And today we're going to go into the structure. And if we want to think of archetype as a hierarchy, and there's like this one consciousness and then it divides itself into two. And we talked a little bit about anima and animus before. We're now going to go into another group of archetypes that work together that I think Steve also mentioned in our first episode, that Carl Jung came up with as this sort of 4 parts of the soul. And so we're going to talk about the king and warrior and lover and magician, and you can say those in whatever order you want. But we're going to actually do the first part of this discussion is going to be about the more masculine archetypes in that group. And then we're going to do another section on the more feminine archetypes in that group. So I learned about these from Steve sharing his really cool experience that he had in his own kind of initiation with some friends.
Yeah, so I was in a kind of a group. We did like the mythopoetic men's thing, and it's really beautiful. Those teachings from that, I love most of them. Some of them are great, and particularly Robert Moore is so interesting for me. He's a Jungian. I would call him a conservative Jungian. So he has very much emphasis on the structure in the subconscious. And so other Jungians are like, the individual expression of those structures is way more important than the structures themselves, right? And so, but he's like, the structures, pay attention to those things because they're going to fuck you up if you don't, and they're empowering when you do. So it's really interesting to encounter these. And, one of the things I want to mention is that any archetypal system will dominate your thinking because it's so numinous. When you really tap into these parts of yourself, you start to see it everywhere. You start to see it in your behavior. And there's a lot of other systems and ways to look at these things. And, so don't get get caught up in it, right? And then you'll see it and you'll get a lot of energy from seeing it and understanding it, hopefully. And then understand that this is a complex relationship. It's like trying to understand a body by looking at one cell or one part, one organ. It's really interesting. It's fascinating. Oh, this is all my problem. People do this health all the time. This is my problem. It's my stomach. Really, it's like there's this whole interactive, very complex way that things tend to work with. So archetypes are the same thing. We're talking about this whole world and maybe even infinite amount of ways that we can do this, but taking it down to this like fourfold, what Jung called the fourfold nature of the soul, and then some of the people that worked with him kind of came down to naming these in different ways. And he had his own kind of structure. And if you imagine a diamond, and on top it's the masculine part, and there's 4 corners, right, of this pyramidal diamond. And on the bottom there's the yonic, the phallic part on top, the yonic part, the feminine kind of cup, and then the 4 sides of that were these, that's kind of how it looks like graphically. Yeah. So Robert Moore takes this and comes up with these archetypes, and he talks about this in a masculine way, but I see that these archetypes have a masculine and feminine in them. So everybody's masculine, everybody's feminine, and he divided them up into this idea of king on one corner, warrior. So those kind of the active archetypes, the real kind of like, I guess you could say masculine focus kind of archetypes. And then on the other ones, you have the magician and the lover. So king, warrior, magician, lover. And there's a book he wrote. It's great. Better is the stuff on YouTube. You can go find Robert Moore's teachings on these archetypes. They're really fascinating. But we're going to give you a take and the introduction to these and kind of see how they do it. So back to the story, right? So I'm in this men's group. We decided to initiate ourselves. We actually branded ourselves in the desert. It was pretty fun. And then kind of this group has become a thing. Like we've taken very different paths and have very different lives and very rarely get all together anymore. But one thing I noticed is that we have a lot of interesting medicine for each other. And then I noticed that one of the oldest member of the group was very regal. He has a presence, just a natural masculine presence. And he's like the king, right? And then another one is a business guy. And he's just going to make a business. He's going to do it. He's also, into just like fun and play. And so he's our warrior, And then
boots on the ground.
He's quite the problem solver. I've noticed too. I've actually met all these guys. It's really fun.
It's really fun. So one's guy, he just has his presence. Everybody pays attention. This other guy, he's always really active. He works really hard and gets a project and just fights it through against all odds, kind of thing. And then another friend is a sensitive, I guess you could say, real sensitive soul, just so kind. Just so cool, so chill.
So easy to be around. Gets along with everyone.
He just gets along with everybody. He's just the kind of the water in the fluid in any social container, and he's the lover, And I myself like to, I guess you could say, understand things. So I will look for patterns. Patterns happen, and I will see the patterns and feel the patterns and. And that is the magician. The magician finds pattern in all of this and speaks it and understands it, and then maybe even creates through pattern. So these are the archetypes: king, warrior, magician, lover. And it's funny to see when I saw that, I laughed so hard because we've been studying that, and here we are, kind of constellating. And we all have all of them, right? And that's the thing about archetypes. Everybody has all the archetypes. It's just you will gravitate because of your pattern. One, and then you'll gravitate towards people who have complementary patterns. You'll respect people who have your same pattern, but you'll gravitate towards people, and it's like masculine and feminine, right? If you're a guy who has a lot of masculinity and experiences himself in masculine, you'll attract and be attracted to the feminine, and you'll look at other guys and you'll respect them. But you won't be drawn to them to this complementary way, right?
Yeah, and I think that's a fun play in our relationship, just on a really personal level, is that I have a feminine body, but led most of my life from very masculine energy, and you have a masculine body, but that had a lot of these feminine qualities. And it's been kind of fun to like play with these archetypes and notice them in our relationship. And then like you're seeing that again in your friend group, like when you start to understand the archetypes, you can see how those energies are it's like another like underworld of energies playing and meeting and trying to figure each other out, and life kind of bringing you exactly what you need so that you can integrate more of yourself.
Yeah, because if you've really constellated a king energy, you really need the magician, for instance.
Yeah, you don't really need more kings.
Yeah.
You already know how to be a king.
Yeah, you kind of know that. But you want to know how to exercise that power well, so you'll need a magician, and you won't like the magician often. I was beat up by kings my whole life,
Yikes.
And if you're a magician, you'll figure out the kings, but you're like, those fuckers are full of themselves, right? But you'll need that power. You need that kind of authority, that blessing that the king brings. We'll talk about that in a minute. And so you'll be drawn and repelled in these ways by these different archetypes, and all archetypes are like that. They all meet. The gods are all at Olympus, and they all kind of hate each other,
but they still hang out in the same place.
In the same palace, right?
I mean, except for Hades. We all have a Hades.
But they also visit now and then.
Right? Oh yeah, but still Hades is so needed, So there's kind of this
because you have. Sorry, it just makes me think of the parallels, right? You've got God, Zeus, and then you've got like a Hades, right? And you've got Satan. And so there's always the cast out, banished, contrary to the king, who's archetype, who's like sent away,
and who's absolutely needed.
Yeah,
in the myth,
because
that reflects a part of our being, And so this is an interesting thing. So it's kind of like Pokemon, where you want to catch them all, but. You're going to be...
You gravitate to one type, though.
Yeah,
you pick one style.
Yeah, but you build your deck or whatever in a sort of way that meets a particular channel of energy that you're working
Yeah, and
with.
I think it's great to bring to presence that, you know, you were saying you're going to kind of get obsessed with this, which is really fun. And you're also going to like find the one you gravitate towards and kind of like personality quiz yourself on this, which is also really good. Do that. And remember all of our previous episodes on over-identifying with stuff.
One of my favorite ways to play Pokemon is to be like, you know what type I fucking hate is bug. I'm going to do an all bug team. You know? People look at me like, why are you doing that to yourself? I'm like, I don't know. I just want to see, like, there's got to be a benefit. So I'm exploring this thing.
Exactly.
So play with the bug type.
Example of working with archetype right there.
So we're going to focus today on those
four.
Well, the two, right?
The two, yeah.
Part one is the two.
Yeah, part one is the two. So we're gonna meet the king and the warrior today.
Right.
These are the I call them masculine only because the feminine version of that is queen and either Amazon or you can say warrior, but Amazon is a particular type of feminine warrior that's really interesting in the myth. And there's different types of Amazons throughout the culture. So it's really, really fascinating. So we'll bring these in. Now, I learned these from Robert Moore, and I studied, probably have listened to everything that he's ever said on YouTube because I just got obsessed. I do that. Obsession is my only is my only strategy.
Sure.
So when I get into this stuff, I get into it. And I recommend, there's a couple different ones that he actually does the same break, and he does King Warrior. And so you can go see, and he does Magician Lover on the other one. And so you can go and see this for yourself from a Jungian who's a really good teacher, etc. But I'm going to give you kind of our take and more in the conversation and the question of it than, here's what these are and here's what they do and that kind of thing. So to take it from there, when you think about a king, especially when you think about a mythic king. So when we say myth, we're talking about more the archetype than the actual people who were kings, because the people who were kings will demonstrate the archetype, right? But they won't. But the mythic king, I think, is more important. And when we look at these, we want to look at the shadow side too. So we're going to talk about king and shadow king. And when I say king and shadow king, think of a king in literature, myth, history, whatever. What comes up when I say king?
I mean Arthur immediately.
Arthur, yeah. Right. Oh man, I love Arthur as is kind of like the prototypical king, and also manages to display some of the shadow, but more in negligence than in acting. So it's really fascinating. I got into Arthur myth for a while there too. I've read all of the things on Arthur myth, but so that's the typical. Now, if you think Shadow King, what comes up?
Hitler.
There you go. Yeah. Really, two good examples. Hitler is mythic. He's such a big Hitler.
Yeah, I mean that's valid.
It's like that was an actual figure, but like the idea of Hitler and how that hit the culture at the time or whatever. There's Hitler, who's the actual guy, right? And then there's Hitler, because all you have to do is call somebody Hitler, and we know archetypally what you mean. Yeah, So, it's fascinating to think about how these archetypes come up in each of us. So when you find your inner Arthur, it's really interesting to think about what's happening when I think, who's my inner Arthur? Who's the person that wants to gather the people and bring justice by creating harmony?
And run a kingdom. A community or a family.
Yeah. The first X-Men movie starts with a discussion of one of my favorite books. And it's The Once and Future King. One of my favorite books, because the first part of it is The Sword and the Stone. Disney made a movie out of it. Yep. And but the book is way better, of course. And then the second half is this question of might makes right, because here's these knights going around, these plated wonders who just have all the power and stupidity to go with it. And Arthur trying to figure that out. How do we exercise this might in a way that is harmonious and good?
Right. I mean, he even reins it in, right? The whole thing of chivalry and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. It's like, you are powerful and therefore we have this code of rules and conduct that are going to channel that power in a righteous way, right? So like literally everything about Arthur is deliberately righteous. And if you compare that to Hitler was also incredibly intentional.
Mm-hmm.
And every strategy, every choice he made was like, you could almost look at it as the inverse of like, how do I gain power and use it to gain more power, which is the opposite of, the righteousness of Arthur.
Mm-hmm.
And even his strategic placements, his like political appointments, all the way down to his speeches and his rhetoric were all designed for that purpose. So they are really very like polar opposites.
Yeah. Exactly. Well said. And so, the inner king is really important to find because without the king, there is no blessing. So there's something about the king and the crowning of a king that gives this signature. And you see this in Lord of the Rings myth. You see this in Lion King. You see this in, stuff like Hamlet, playing with the king. And the right of the king, of the natural born king to rule is a mythic symbol,
mm-hmm.
and of our own energy being ours, right? And without the blessing, you don't know that,
Mm-hmm.
and if you don't know that, and I know this because this has been a hard one for me to find. If you don't know that you are yours,
mm-hmm.
you'll be somebody else's.
you'll give yourself to whoever you can so that you can feel somewhat powerful.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the followers of those kings, right? So you look at the knights of the Round Table. They're given power, autonomy. They're given control. And when you look at Nazi guards and soldiers and stuff, where there's like indoctrination and bullying and peer pressure into gratuitous acts of violence.
Yeah.
Well,
the same thing of like, I don't have power. I will join this group to get power and do whatever I have to do to hold it.
Yeah. Well, Hitler happened because a whole country lost its identity lost its blessing.
Yep.
It lost its identity as a good nation and then felt put upon, and we will do anything to feel ourselves as good.
Yeah.
Even if it's the worst.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
We will do anything to feel ourselves as right. The people listening to Donald Trump, I think Donald Trump is a fantastic shadow king figure because all he has to do is tell everybody they're the best. Mm-hmm. And then I'm going to take care of it because I'm powerful and rich. And they're like, yeah,
mm-hmm.
it is like catnip.
I mean, you listen
people
to,
who feel
him
disempowered.
Speak, even if you're like, okay, so I live in this country.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a huge fan of making anyone who has hosted a reality TV show a president. It's a general philosophy that I have. However, I can't vote. And if shit goes bad, I can escape. Right? So as far as unbiased, I'm doing my best, right?
Take me with you.
But if you listen to him talk, none of it makes sense.
No.
But it all sounds great.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like listening to him talk about like childcare the other day, and he was like, the numbers you're talking about and the numbers I'm talking about are different numbers. And I'm like, what the fuck did you just say? Right? And he's like, your numbers are nothing compared to my numbers. And I'm like, I don't understand,
Yes.
but now I want your numbers. Like,
all he ever does, his whole strategy is say, I'm the best. I have the best strategies. I have the best numbers. I have the best education. One time he was like, I know the words. I know all the best words, while he's not using anything like the best words.
Right. But that's powerful because what he's offering to the country is their self back.
Yeah.
Right? Like there was a time when America was number one in a bunch of things, and now really we're number one in a bunch of not so great things. But we want that. We want the American dream to be real again. And so when someone offers you yourself back to
your
you,
blessing. This is what he's saying. So the king gives the blessing.
Right.
And so everybody's kind of inner self, if it can feel like it's part of something important, then it has that reason to live. And then all of our energy is open to us.
Yeah.
with a true blessing. So here's the question. Comfort. How do you get the blessing? Mm-hmm. So what do you think?
Well, it's fascinating because I was listening to the Michael Meade, How to Not Abandon Yourself, that Steve recommended earlier this week. I was listening to that on the way here. Teaching. And here he's talking about every person is born with a divine gift, basically, or some kind of genius. And it's in a, ideal culture, somewhere in the adolescent period, they're going to start asking questions about that and wondering, what do I owe the world? What does the world owe me? And how do I find out? And then there's some kind of midwife or elder or something that's like helping them with this. Mm-hmm. And he's talking about how we can even discover our own genius, but until somebody who's like older or better, some kind of master sees us and gives us that blessing and that validity, it's not the same.
Yeah.
And that's something that's been largely missing from our culture for a long time now.
I mean, we have the self-made man is the myth of America, if you want to go like the American dream, the self-made man. And that is deliberately in defiance of what you're talking about, of finding my own things and doing it myself and kicking ass on my own. And I'm in this situation right now where I'm moving into a role that I've never been in before, elevated level of responsibility and power. And I'm like, I don't see myself here. I don't understand. I don't feel comfortable. I don't feel confident. Every day I'm like, am I doing this right? Am I fucking it up? And I was literally in a coaching community of practice meeting yesterday, and I was like, is there anyone out there who is willing to mentor me a little bit in this new place? Because I recognized that I can't force myself to be my own master in this moment. Like I needed more guidance. And so like with that, I think sometimes we look for the external blessing of a master.
Yeah.
And we need to be able to like that's great and it has its place. And then there's the place of being able to bless yourself.
Well, that's what we should be able to do. And it should just be meritorious, right? And rather than, for instance, we have all sorts of false blessing going on. So if I go to school, I can earn a certificate in psychology, for instance, which would make it so that I could do for a living what I already do really at a high level without that certificate. Right. So I have to give myself enough blessing that people actually are convinced of it. Now, I'm not saying that there's something wrong with credentialing. There's some merit to other people in going through some rigor in a process, and there's some safety or whatever in it. But on the other hand, it's bullshit because there's psychologists who aren't worth shit, but they have a thing on the wall, and they get paid by insurance companies to treat people, in that whole process.
And it's clearly not their genius.
Not their genius, but they went to a psychologist one time and they got help, so they thought they should be a psychologist, which happens all the time. And this blessing thing is really, really powerful, and it can be dangerous.
Yes, the amount of people that I've seen deemed intelligent or brilliant because they have the brilliance of being able to pass a credentialing test.
Right.
I'm like, that guy's a fucking moron.
Yeah.
But he tests well.
Yeah.
So he's got a master's degree.
Yeah. Well, and that's, all through education, we have this idea that testing can somehow prove genius, which it just can't.
No.
If we're going for genius, we're going for being able to take a test well. Boy, we're doing a good job.
Yeah.
No, actually, we're not doing even a good job at that.
No. But that's all a test can test is can you test?
Right. Right. But if we're looking for genius and actually thinking and process. So anyway, the blessing can get distorted, you see.
Yeah.
And so in ourselves it can. Now the blessing, here's the thing, it goes with all the archetypes. They're numinous. The king is a really numinous archetype. It's the secret, it's the key to all the other archetype. That basic, I feel good about myself.
I feel sure of myself.
So I feel sure of myself.
Yeah.
The lady of the lake rose up and gave me Excalibur, or I pulled it out of a stone, where God was smiling on that process one day, and I had the right to be
divine
my
right to
own
rule.
decision maker.
Yeah.
I determined my fate.
It's interesting too, because like I determine my fate, but like if you look historically at kings, we look at the divine right to rule. Like that's how European kings especially justified their existence, right? And so we almost find the need when we have to justify to others, we look for an external source that is more than ourselves and be like, okay, well, God says I should be king.
Well,
an Egyptian, it's like, I am the God in human form. Like we look for an external justification or blessing when we're trying to justify ourselves to others.
We do. And I think of all of human history is this work with this thing. And I think democracy and republicanism happened because we were ready to take on more of our projected greatness. Kings are always your projected king. You see, I have a king, and then I project it because I can't handle that.
Sure.
It's a lot of responsibility.
Because it's a lot of responsibility. As soon as I can handle it, I'm going to take that back.
Right.
You know, I think it's time for a nation of kings, right? A whole world of kings. But we still kind of have this thing where we want to project our grandiosity onto a religious figure. We want to project our grandiosity onto a president.
Yeah, a government of some kind, yeah.
Even just, a guru or somebody who's like rich and handsome or beautiful on YouTube or Instagram. And it's interesting, the whole idea of false blessing. And, as you're talking about that, noticing a pattern in myself where like I went into this like hyper vigilant mode where I was like, I'm going to get all the blessings. Like that's the only way to be significant in this world. And so I became ridiculously good at all these things. And I'm completely lost in that because those weren't real blessings.
Yeah.
So definitely much more of a shadow situation.
Yeah. I mean, it's, I can still do all those things. I have the skills, right?
Yeah.
But when somebody tells me I'm good at, oh, you're so good at that, it almost like is repulsive because it's like, that's not what I'm about.
Yeah.
Help me know what I'm about.
Anymore.
Yeah.
So let's move on to the magician. The warrior. Sorry, let me do that again. Let's move on to the warrior. Okay. So the warrior being the one who acts is kind of the vibe, the feet on the ground, the doer, the go-getter, the problem solver.
Yeah. Yeah, warrior's a good one. I want to make a general point on archetype as we move into warrior. And that is that you have to find this, right? So if you don't find the king, if you don't find the king, you won't ever feel good about who you are and what you do. If you don't find the warrior, you'll never do it.
Yeah.
You can sit there and feel good about it and you're king.
And never act.
But your warrior gets the energy in motion, right? It is the one that will see what is sacred and go to the healthy warrior. See what is sacred and absolutely it's non-negotiable that gets protected or promoted.
See, this is the one that I relate to the most.
Yeah.
I feel like I give off king vibes sometimes. I have a lot of authority and like the way I speak and my size and all the things. But at the end of the day, my biggest thing is just getting the thing. Like once I've identified the thing that's necessary, I work my ass off to get it done, right? And that's like the value that I have added to every institution I've ever been in, right? Including this one, right? I get things done.
Yeah.
And so like, to me, this is the one where the like burnout is such a hot topic we talk about today in the world. And the warrior dances between productivity and complete burnout. And like the shadow warrior, I feel like gets the wrong things done.
Well, he acts for action's sake.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay, there you go. So just acting to act.
Yeah. Well, and what's a warrior without a king? He's a rogue.
A sword. A mercenary.
He's a mercenary. Yeah. Mercenary is the shadow warrior.
There you go.
And, Soch is also like that. Can get shit done. And, if doesn't check back with king, right? Or queen, whatever you have, king, queen. Queen.
Queer works for me.
All right, her king is here.
Queer monarch.
But anyway,
if you don't, then then can just go and get all sorts of things done, but then it then goes, oh shit, what did I do? What did I do to myself?
Yeah, I'm definitely in that pattern where I get burned out.
Yeah,
because I took my sword out for something that like actually wasn't blessed by my king.
Right. And I mean, I see this in coaches all the time, where they just want to do things, they just want to get it done, they want to help, they want to get in there and fix things, and then they fall on their own sword because they've like driven themselves to exhaustion doing something that the person should have been able to do for themselves, right? Like they take over. And like I've seen this in myself, where you take over the doing that belongs to somebody else. And it might still be a thing that needs to get done. It might still be a thing that's blessed by the king if you want to go institutionally, right? But it wasn't yours to do.
Yeah.
And that's the same as the mercenary. You burn yourself out doing someone else's work, and then your work gets left abandoned because you didn't look for your blessing.
And we put a lot of emphasis on work.
Your action.
And we have a whole system that dominates uses the labor of people for Shadow King's benefit.
Right.
So we divorce these things. So capitalism is the fact where you're taking your labor and you're putting it towards somebody else's interest.
Yeah.
Because they have to make more money off of you than they have to, then what your labor has to be worth more than you're actually getting for it.
Yeah.
For it to work,
Yeah. For the system to work, you have to be more productive than you are expensive.
Right. And so, getting these two in cahoots is really a powerful masculine presence where and you look at the symbols, the king has the crown. It's this, God has blessed this. This is in harmony with nature. It's in harmony with God. You look at the symbol of kinghoods, and that's what they are. They're harmonious.
I mean, they're
symbols.
all pointing up. Like think of the Pope's hat thing,
yeah.
right? It points up. And then the warrior has the tool.
The warrior has the sword.
Right, which like if you think about a sword as a giant knife, right? Essentially is a tool for action.
Yeah, it is a tool. It's a show of force that's going to create an effect.
Yeah.
And one of the things about action that's really interesting is it's decision, right? So that cutting, I make decisions.
Right.
Yeah, it's like the yes that is absolute.
It's absolute.
So this yes is also everything else is a no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the places I find myself in right now with, trying to heal this like burnt out warrior thing, is like, there are so many different things I could put my yes towards.
Absolutely.
And sitting in the confusion of that at the same time knowing, okay, I also have to make a living.
Yep.
Which my genius may or may not do that for me, right? And so it's like, how do I because once I do get that yes, like the Red Sea opens for me. Like it's so easy and beautiful and clear, and my energy is limitless in that space.
Your sword is sharp. But where you're pointing it, you're not sure.
Yeah, and I'm not quite sure. And it's a really interesting place for me. And I feel like I'm not alone. There's like a collective, like, what have we been doing with our swords? Who have we been serving?
Oh, yeah.
And where's the direction for me, going forward into this next, season?
I mean, the whole quiet quitting thing that was huge for a long time and still is quite prevalent is literally the warriors, which are the working force in this country, saying, where am I pointing myself right now? What am I doing and who am I doing it for? And how much am I doing and how much of it is honoring what I should be doing?
Yeah. So
there is actually this massive, like in the workforce, turning to your own kinghood. And looking back and being like, I haven't been, like, who have I been doing this for? And shifting the focus to the self. And I feel that like burnout to me is definitely when you can't raise your sword anymore because you're not actually using it for good. I mean, I can't remember the myth anymore, but there's this myth of the sword that gets heavier every time it's used, when it's used for like against righteousness. And I cannot for the life of me remember where I read this thing, but it basically is like once the warrior can't lift his sword anymore, he turns back and says, and refocuses his attention to where it should be, suddenly the sword is light as a feather and he can go again, right? And this whole thing,
kind of Thor's hammer, kind of
right,
kind of thing.
yeah, kind of like that. And that's where a lot of people are, I think, in the workforce right now, is they're looking for the blessing and realizing they've been following a false blessing for a long time.
Yeah, and realizing they've been using all their energy in some other way than what is honoring. And my experience is, born with a lot of feminine, but like expected to be masculine. My king didn't show up for whatever reasons, whole stories, and I could tell you there. But my king never felt like it got the blessing. Like I never felt like I was okay with anybody, let alone you're like, what is this for? And then the warrior, for me, I'm so scattered. The ADHD pattern is kind of that, so much energy and it doesn't know where to go.
Yeah.
And so like finding any kind of focus is extremely difficult. Like I can do all sorts of things and never get anything done, and it's frustrating. So, working with this archetypally, this is a really good example of how you can find it. So I've done a lot of work with king energy, and it's like, okay, how do I feel that in myself? I've done a lot of work with warrior energy. I think that'll be tough for me my whole life. I like finding my inner warrior and really getting it, my sword sharpened and ready to get on my horse with the armor on and feeling like I'm doing my thing. Maybe that will always be a little bit difficult. But it's worth working with this archetypally and meeting those in stories and meeting those in yourself and having conversations and healing parts of them and using this imagery to create these energies.
Yeah. And I feel like some of the most beneficial work that I've done with that kind of wounded warrior is the work with boundary. And I can't tell you that I've found my yes yet. But I'm getting closer because I've found a lot of no's.
Yeah.
And that's been really important for me as this like open, loving, everything's okay, I'll try anything, that kind of part of my personality, to say, okay, I played that game for a while and I've tried a lot of things and now I know. That's not for me. That's not for me. That's not for me. That's not for me. And that's been really powerful. And I feel this kind of like, my sword is, I'm getting
You're
closer.
Honing it. It's honing.
Well, you find what's honoring you find the battle that's honoring to fight, and you find in the Amazon, it's really interesting. So the feminine warrior could be called Amazon, and that is femininity is powerful, and you better recognize that. Or you will be eaten. So it's to really hone in on the feminine principle particularly, and the feminine sword comes out in the defense of the feminine experience, and that looks a little different, right? That looks a little different than the knight in his armor. It's the Amazon, wild and harmonious in the forest. These are interesting. They're interesting images. They're not. There's no mistake in these myths, right? They come out through these processes, and it's really interesting to think. Okay, so the king gets the blessing. What does the warrior get? What is the
to me it's the
energy,
strength, right? So if you are a warrior working under the king's blessing, you get strength and power, right? Really, like that's authority. Yeah, like it's really like the Knights of the Round Table had the authority of King Arthur, right? And so they ran with that, and it was unquestioned. They knew exactly where their power came from.
Yeah.
And if I look at those elements of myself, and I say, I as the king, bless I as the warrior, that warrior now directed at a yes is unstoppable. That blade is sharp and it moves.
Yeah.
Right. So
yes, I that is really well said. I think that the warrior energy is the initiation. The initiation energy, and each of these archetypes deserves an initiation, right? But the warrior itself, like knighthood, right? Like you're in service, right? What are you in service to? What do you want to initiate yourself? Initiation literally means going forward into, right? What is the initiation that is honoring to you and the energies that you want to take on? Initiation is a big energy. It's a whole thing. We'll talk about it sometime. But like that warrior seeks and can give initiation. It knows what battles to fight, basically, and what not to, right? Mm-hmm. So I think initiation is is kind of a masculine principle. There's a feminine aspect of it, but initiation is like that interesting, like where does this energy go when it goes really well? Yeah. Because when you're in initiation, it takes you in a path and it pushes you forward. Also, the warrior has so much energy, so much energy. It is the numinosity of the king's blessing put into action.
Yeah, I feel like the last time I really fully felt this energy was when I started midwifery 7 years ago. And it was unstoppable, undeniable. And absolutely did I have to fight battles to do what I did. But there was also this energy of like the Red Sea parting, like things just falling in my lap, dropping into place, getting through my training. I got through all my training before I could even legally take the test. It was just like crazy amounts of experience was just like there. And I was there to meet it.
Resistance falls away. When you match blessing with action, resistance does fall away, right? And I think you think of that as like the sharper your sword, the less resistance you face, right? That's the whole principle of sharpness, right? It is very much like that. And you see, to me, it's been manifest in like opportunities that I thought were going to be way more difficult to break into, just suddenly parting and in I go. Right?
Before we leave warrior, just one thing I have to say is that when the warrior goes home, they are productive. The Greek idea of I can't remember what they called them, but the landholder who then goes to war, and he's fighting for his land, for his family, for his people, for his gods, right? That's different than the warrior you get hired and then for money goes out and fights. See, so the real warrior fights for what's sacred,
right?
And when they go home, there's just a hell of a lot of fun. Nobody can have fun like a warrior. Nobody can show up and just be like, enjoy life. Because when they're off of the battle, of the crux, that energy turns into enjoyment of life. So the warrior should get to go home. And the warrior that doesn't get to go home that's a bad part of yourself. So if you're always on, always having to fight, it's a lot,
Yeah.
So
then you're the mercenary, right? Then
they become distorted by the fight, and they stop being and living what they're fighting for.
I would say it's even like the berserker. Like it becomes the warrior that is fueled by the violence of the fight, like by the struggle, by the pain,
which has a power. When you surrender, that has a power. That's kind of a dark Jedi type of power, right?
Yeah.
But the real thing, you'll know it because it will go home.
Yeah,
and it will find what's there, and it will celebrate that and live in joyous peace. Nobody can appreciate peace like the warrior.
Yeah, and you think about all of the wounded warriors in the capitalist workforce, and what's the meme is you go home and watch TV and maybe get drunk, and there's like a deadness.
Yeah, there isn't revelry, there isn't life. Yeah. There's retreat, and there's try to
get anything that feels better than the war.
Yeah. There's escape.
And
right?
there's a bitterness and jadedness that can really set in when you've taken your sword out so many times and then turned around and found out that the cause wasn't what you were told, or that it wasn't just, or that the blessing that you got was
righteous.
False.
Yeah.
And I want a presence that a lot of people who leave high demand religion go through sometimes a very long phase of having trying to renegotiate that because they feel so absolutely betrayed.
Yeah, they were
by that false blessing.
They were in the holy fight.
Yeah,
which is a whole nother game, right? Like, whew. And
well, if you're in a holy fight for a false god, there's nothing that sounds more devastating to me than that. Or that's intense.
Yeah.
Yeah, or for somebody else's benefit, you're helping somebody else's self and not your own soul. You're not really in touch with your own soul. So I think it's a really good rundown of those two archetypes. You can see how powerful that is to dip into these, and you can start putting other archetypes in these categories, right? Other archetypes, you could look at the Olympus and you could look at the different ones.
Where does Loki fit? Where does Ares fit?
Right.
And Zeus and
right, how they fit, in those different ways. So I think it's really brilliant to kind of to encounter these. Everybody does encounter these, but doing it consciously. Here's another thing about archetype that Robert Moore makes a very, very big statement. I might have said this. They will play you if you don't feel them. They are numerous. These are huge. When you attach to that it will get you, right? And that warrior, you'll become the warrior rather than somebody who has warrior energy. You'll become the king. You'll be the narcissist, right? Or you'll be the, the what's the version of that in the warrior? You'll be the mercenary or the person who just acts because they don't know what else to do other than just act.
Well, it's like I'm trying to think of what is the savage.
Yeah.
The berserker, yeah.
Okay, so that's fun.
Thanks for joining us for this discussion on King and Warrior, the masculine leaning pair in the four archetypes. And we hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please like, share, subscribe, and share this with your friends and join our conversation. We love questions. So if there's something you'd like to either be on the show and join us for a Conversations with Life Live, or if you have a question you'd like us to have
I guarantee